In the 1950s, school segregation was common around the United States, right? Not just in the South, where segregation was legal, but also in the North, right? Where it was enforced by custom, right? It's just the way things were. And also because of housing discrimination, right? Where there's, certain neighborhoods of people of color and they have to go to schools within their district, okay? So you got, housing segregation and school segregation connected. Now, in 1946, the Latin American Civil Rights Organization known as LULAC, right, the League of United Latin American Citizens, they helped to bring the case of Gonzalo Mendez to court. Okay, Mendez's daughter, Sylvia, had been denied access to white schools in California. Okay, her attorney made an argument that segregation has a negative effect on one's self-confidence, and it hurts their ability to be productive citizens. So Mendez and LULAC, they were successful. They won the case, right? Mendez versus Westminster. And so this is going to eventually lead to desegregation of schools in the state of California, not nationally, but in the state of California. So huge victory, right? Mexican-American activists getting involved and making a big difference, all right? In 1954, the case of Brown versus Board of Education is going to involve another father, Oliver Brown, who was bringing the issue of school segregation to court because his daughter wasn't allowed to go to a white school in Kansas. Now, Thurgood Marshall of the NAACP, he acted as Brown's lawyer, and he argued that segregation has an impact on one's self-esteem, right? So it's kind of similar to the Mendez case. And the court's decision would eventually end school segregation, okay? As the court basically decided that segregation violated the 14th Amendment, okay? Remember, the 14th Amendment is supposed to ensure equal rights no matter what race you are, okay? But it took years, and eventually, through government intervention, which had to force some schools to finally integrate, you would eventually see integration taking place, right, in the country. But it took years, okay? Because there's a lot of resistance. Let's talk about that now. So after the decision in Brown versus Board of Education, almost all of the Southern senators in the U.S. Senate and Congress signed what is called the Southern Manifesto, which called upon people to resist the integration of schools. When I say integration, I'm talking about making schools mixed race, where it doesn't matter what race you are, everyone can go to any school. Okay, integration. Now, many cities in the South, some of them would actually close down their schools if their schools were ordered to integrate, right? Maybe not all the schools at one time, some cases maybe, but in other cases, maybe like one school was ordered to integrate, and so they'd shut that school down. So in the case, for example, in the state of Virginia, you have schools being closed down, and they made money available to white students so that these white students could afford to go to private schools. So close the public schools and then have white students go to private schools where they can still enforce segregation. So yeah, there's massive resistance going on to desegregation of the schools. Another example, in Little Rock, Arkansas, you have the governor, Orville Faubus. He's going to block 9 African-American students from attending Little Rock Central High School, okay? He actually brings the National Guard to stop them from going to this high school, okay, after the school was ordered to integrate. And so this is going to force President Eisenhower's hand. He has to do something, right? Because here you have a governor who's trying to stop a decision that came from the Supreme Court, right? It's basically state power versus federal power, basically. So President Eisenhower has to step in, even though he's not really a strong supporter of civil rights necessarily. Okay, it's not really it's not like he's against it, but he's not, totally. He's not really a big supporter. He's not doing much for civil rights. Okay, but he's got to step in. So he's forced to send in the military to Little Rock, Arkansas, right, to make sure that the school was integrated. So you got this crazy scene. Maybe you've seen Forrest Gump, right, where you got this crazy scene at the school where there's crowds of angry white Southerners who are protesting, saying racial slurs as these 9 African American students are attempting to go in school, and so it takes like military to to bring them into the school, to physically integrate the school, because there's so much resistance coming from Southerners, partially due to the Southern Manifesto, right? It's got support from Congress, right? Southern congressmen were supporting this idea to resist the integration in the schools. In addition to school segregation, African American civil rights organizations worked to end segregation in all forms, right, throughout society. In 1955, Rosa Parks, who has had a history of being involved in civil rights, in the civil rights movement, she had worked for the NAACP. She carried out a sit-in. Okay, she carried out a sit-in where she basically refused to move from the white section at the front of a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Okay, and she's going to get arrested. And after her arrest, a boycott was organized, right? A boycott of all the buses in Montgomery. Okay, so that took place for about over a year. Okay, and this puts an economic burden on the city, right? And so it's going to hurt the public transit system, not bringing in as much money as it used to. And this is all in an effort. The boycott is an effort to end segregation on public transit. So you have African American civil rights organizations creating carpools instead of riding the buses. They're doing carpooling to work. Okay, so they organize carpools to drive workers to their jobs. Other people just simply walk to work instead of taking the bus, right? But work might be far away, so that's a sacrifice. But that's a sacrifice that they're willing to make, right, to end segregation. All right, and the city in Montgomery, Alabama, it responds by making carpools illegal, right? Trying to force people to use the buses again. This is happening towards the end of the boycott. But still, the civil rights movement persists. And in 1956, in the case of Browder versus Gale, this is a separate case from the Rosa Parks incident, the Supreme Court is going to rule that segregation on public buses is unconstitutional. Right? Effectively, this is going to end segregation on public transportation. Big victory, huge victory, okay? And so the Montgomery bus boycott is going to inspire the modern civil rights movement, okay? So it's going to expand. The civil rights movement is not going to just be in Montgomery, it's going to expand in the 1950s. The Black church is going to be at the center of the movement. You got a young preacher, Martin Luther King Jr., he's going to become a strong leader in the civil rights movement, and he's going to promote the ideology of nonviolence, okay? The nonviolent approach to fighting for civil rights and equality, okay? And King is inspired heavily by the teaching of Mohandas Gandhi. Okay, you guys maybe heard of Gandhi before. Gandhi played a major role in the independence movement in India when India gained its independence from the British Empire in the 1940s. Gandhi had been involved for years, and he pushed for nonviolence to try to achieve independence. And so Dr. King was also inspired by this ideology of nonviolence. He says it's great. He's a preacher at the same time, so Christian values, of course, he's leaning on that. And so the movement is going to move in this direction of nonviolence. Okay, Dr. King also, along with several other African American ministers, founded an organization, right, that's going to help direct the civil rights movement, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Okay, this is going to take place in 1956, and so otherwise known as the SCLC. Now, the SCLC sought to expand the fight for civil rights beyond just Montgomery, Alabama. Okay, the SCLC is going to coordinate with other local activist groups in various different parts of the South in an effort to end segregation. Okay, so to build on the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which this is a Civil Rights Act that passed, and it's trying to protect African American voting rights. So to build on that, the SCLC also created a campaign to increase African American voter registration. Okay, so this is going to increase the community's political power, which could be used, for example, to challenge the Jim Crow laws. The Jim Crow laws legalized segregation in the South. Okay, so it's important to have that political power to vote people into office who are going to oppose the Jim Crow laws, right? We'll talk more about the civil rights movement in later modules, but for now, we're just kind of focusing on the beginning of the movement, how it's getting re-energized in the 1950s.